My name is Ricardo Martins. I'm a physician with more than 20 years of experience in emergency rooms, intensive care, and critical situations where, very often, life hangs by mere seconds. Throughout my career, I have treated countless patients in critical states, faced cases where medicine seemed to have no resources left, and, at certain times, witnessed events that went far beyond any scientific explanation. I decided to share this story with you not only as a doctor, but also as someone who deeply believes in the importance of keeping our minds open to the unknown. Medicine is a science based on evidence, calculations, and protocols, and I follow these protocols every single day with discipline and responsibility. But the truth is that, even surrounded by monitors, tests, numbers, and technology, there are moments when life surprises us in inexplicable ways. I graduated from medical school in the late 1990s, at a time when resources were more limited than they are today. I worked in overcrowded public hospitals, where pressure was constant, and also in highly complex private institutions with cutting-edge technology. In these two very different realities, I learned something essential. At the center of it all, beyond machines, medications, or protocols, there is always a person, a fragile human being, carrying a story, fears, dreams, and a family waiting outside. That is what motivates me every day to put on my white coat. The story I will tell you today happened during one of my longest and most intense shifts. It was one of those days when the hospital seemed to breathe tension in every hallway. The strong smell of antiseptic, the alarms of monitors going off, the constant coming and going of nurses. All of that is part of my daily routine, but that night something would happen that I could never erase from my memory. What I'm about to narrate is not a common case. It is not just another story of recovery or medical success. It is an account of what happens when the line between science and mystery becomes so thin that it nearly disappears. An event that, to this day, makes me reflect. Not only as a doctor, but as a human being. I know that many of you watching believe medicine has an answer for everything, that if there is a machine monitoring every heartbeat, if there are powerful drugs flowing through the veins, then nothing can go out of control. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes, in the middle of dropping graphs and vanishing numbers, something greater happens, something that made me rethink the true meaning of the word miracle. Before we begin this narrative, let me be clear. I am not here to question science, nor to replace it with beliefs. I am here to tell you exactly how it happened faithfully, so that each of you can draw your own conclusions. What I saw, what I lived, and what I felt that night goes far beyond any medical class or physiology book. So, get ready, because this story begins with a silence that chills any doctor, the moment when a heart monitor flatlines, announcing the end. But just a few minutes later, something happened. Something that completely changed the way I see life and death. And that is what we will talk about from now on. The sound no doctor ever wants to hear filled the room. A continuous beep. The heart monitor, which only seconds earlier showed weak and irregular beats, suddenly flatlined. The green line that had been rising and falling turned into a straight, cold, silent line. Anyone who has witnessed that moment knows. It's the announcement that life is slipping away, that the heart has given up the fight. The entire team froze for an instant. It's impressive how in those seconds time seems to stretch. The bright lights of the room reflected off the sweat on the nurses' foreheads, eyes locked in silence, and everyone waited for my command. This was the moment to act fast, because every second could mean the difference between life and death. But before continuing this story, I need to ask you something, you who are watching right now. What I'm about to share is a real account, lived in the flesh, during a night that forever marked my medical journey. For YouTube to deliver this video to more people, I need your help. Do it now. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments the phrase, "I believe in miracles." I need at least 100 comments for this message to spread further, for more people to reflect on what I'm about to tell you. Your participation is not just a gesture of support, it's also a way to spread hope. Now, back to that moment. Imagine the scene. The flatlined monitor, alarms blaring, and a life hanging by a thread. I had been in many similar situations, but there was something different about that night. I don't know if it was the silence hanging in the air, the tension in the team's eyes, or the strange sensation that ran down my spine like a chill. But something inside me told me this case would not be like the others. "Doctor, flatline!" the nurse alerted, her voice breaking. I gave the order to begin resuscitation maneuvers, chest compressions, adrenaline, electric shocks, everything we train, repeat, and practice to try to reverse the inevitable end. But no matter what we did, the monitor remained unchanged, with no sign of activity. It was as if the body had already given up, as if every cell had surrendered. The air grew heavy. I could hear the rapid breathing of the technicians, the sound of chest compressions echoing through the room, and that relentless, merciless beep that kept reminding us we were fighting against the impossible. In moments like these, medicine teaches us to be firm, rational, to stay focused and follow protocols. But inside me, something was screaming. And it wasn't just the voice of the experienced doctor, it was something deeper. A mix of intuition and faith, as if an invisible presence was standing there, watching everything. And then, when it seemed like there was nothing left to do, the unexpected began to unfold. The patient's name was Carlos Alberto. He was 58 years old and had been brought to the ER by his wife. He was a simple man, a construction worker, with calloused hands from decades of labor. As she accompanied him to the reception desk, her eyes betrayed the fear of losing the companion of so many years. Carlos had first felt chest pain at home. At first, he thought it was just fatigue from his heavy routine. But when the pain worsened, radiating into his left arm, accompanied by shortness of breath and cold sweats, his wife didn't hesitate. She put him in the car and drove frantically to the hospital. At that moment, I had already been on duty for over 12 hours. Long shifts are always a challenge, not just physically, but mentally. And I confess, when I saw Carlos being wheeled in, pale, gasping for breath, one hand on his chest and the other clinging to his wife, I knew immediately this would not be a simple case. His eyes said it all, the eyes of a man who knows something serious is happening inside his body. As we placed him on the stretcher and began the initial procedures, I quickly asked about his medical history. He had hypertension, had suffered an angina episode years earlier, but had never done regular follow-ups. Like many men, he preferred to believe it was nothing and that it would soon pass. It didn't pass. And now we were facing what looked like an acute myocardial infarction. The monitor was connected and the vital signs appeared: low blood pressure, irregular heart rate, dropping oxygen saturation. His heart was fighting, but losing strength by the minute. The team followed the protocol with precision: IV access, oxygen, preparing the medication. Technically, everything seemed under control, but Carlos's face told another story. He grabbed my arm with the little strength he had left and whispered, "Doctor, I don't want to die." Those words always carry immense weight. Throughout my career, I've heard similar pleas countless times, but they never get easier. Each phrase carries an entire life of fears, memories, and hopes. At that moment, it wasn't just Carlos's body at risk. It was also his wife's faith, his family's story, the dreams he still wanted to live. I looked into his eyes, and as I always do in such moments, answered firmly, "You're in good hands. We're going to fight together." His wife outside waited anxiously, pacing back and forth in the hallway. I knew that with each passing second, her anguish grew. Doctors learn to handle the technical side, but we are never indifferent to the human drama. The love on her face was proof that Carlos was not just another patient. He was a husband, a friend, a pillar. Soon after, the exams confirmed it was indeed a heart attack in progress and an aggressive one. We did everything in our power with medication, but the condition kept worsening. With each moment, the monitor's tracings grew more unstable. Carlos's heart was collapsing, and so, minutes later, in front of the team, we witnessed that moment that chills every healthcare professional. The monitor flatlined. But the story would not end there. On the contrary, it was only beginning. When the monitor flatlined, the room plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by the shrill alarm echoing like a cruel warning. Flatline. Carlos's heart had stopped. At that instant, every eye turned to me. As the doctor, I knew I had only seconds to decide and act. "Start compressions," I ordered firmly. The technician immediately began chest compressions, pressing down on Carlos's chest in rhythmic movements, while the nurse prepared the adrenaline. With each push on his chest, his body jolted violently, as if life itself were being forced back inside. Minutes in a situation like that feel like hours. Sweat ran down my forehead, my hands remained steady, but inside I was fighting against the overwhelming sense that we were losing him. The monitor's lines stayed frozen, cold, without even the slightest flicker. "Adrenaline given," the nurse announced. We placed the defibrillator pads. "Charging, 200 joules. Clear," I shouted. Carlos's body jumped with the shock, and for a brief second, everyone held their breath. But the monitor remained unchanged. The flat line continued, mercilessly cutting between life and death. Time was racing. Every second without circulation meant irreversible brain damage. I knew it. The team knew it. Yet no one stopped. Even the smallest glimmer of hope kept us moving. After the second shock, a faint wave flickered on the monitor. It was quick, like a whisper lost in the wind. Then silence again. Carlos's heart wasn't responding. At that moment, I looked at his face. Pale, unresponsive, as if he had already crossed over. A knot formed in my throat. We doctors are trained to stay strong, to remain objective. But inside, we are human. We feel the weight of every life that slips through our hands. I kept going with compressions, while my mind battled between reason and faith. Reason told me we were at the end. We had already surpassed the safe limits for recovery. But something deep inside me screamed not to give up. The nurse, exhausted, gave me a silent look, as if asking, "How long are we going to keep trying?" That is one of the hardest decisions in medicine, knowing when there's nothing more to be done. But I wasn't ready to give up on Carlos, not yet. Not with his wife waiting outside, desperate for news. Not with his words echoing in my mind, "Doctor, I don't want to die." The inner conflict was intense. Science showed me the limits. The flat line reinforced the harsh reality. But something else, an intuition, a whisper, kept pushing me forward. I continued giving orders, insisting with each maneuver, even when everything pointed to the inevitable. And then suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I can't explain why, but the atmosphere in that room changed. It felt like the air had grown heavier, as if an unseen presence was with us. I said nothing to the team, but deep down I knew something was about to happen. And it was in that moment of complete darkness, at the peak of the crisis, that the story began to take a turn none of us would ever forget. The silence of the room was broken only by the mechanical rhythm of chest compressions. Sweat dripped from the team's faces, their eyes reflecting exhaustion and frustration. We had already gone beyond the medically acceptable time for a patient to return without severe brain damage. By logic, Carlos had no chance. By life standards, the inevitable was already happening before us. I was about to make the hardest call. I took a deep breath, glanced at the clock on the wall, and prepared to say the heaviest words a doctor can pronounce. Time of death. Those 3 words carry devastating weight. They end the fight, crush hope, and echo into the hallway where a wife waits, clinging to her last shred of faith. But something stopped me. A quiet, almost imperceptible voice inside whispered, "Not yet." It was as if a greater force held my hand and wouldn't let me give up, and it was in that exact moment that the unexpected happened. The monitor, which until then had shown a merciless flat line, suddenly flickered. A small spike, brief, like a spark trying to reignite a fire. The team froze, eyes wide. I kept the compressions going. Another flicker appeared, then another, and then suddenly the continuous alarm gave way to an intermittent sound. Beep, beep, beep. The team gasped. Carlos's heart was beating again, weak, irregular, but beating. "We have a pulse!" the nurse cried out, her voice trembling with emotion. I rushed to check his blood pressure, oxygen levels, pupillary response. It was almost impossible to believe what we were seeing. By science, he shouldn't have been there anymore. By logic, that heart should not have come back. But life had chosen to write a different ending. With each passing second, Carlos's vital signs began to stabilize. The monitor, which moments earlier had felt like a death sentence, now displayed a courageous fight for life. That rhythmic beeping sounded like music, an anthem of hope that filled the entire room with renewed energy. The team, who only minutes earlier had been on the edge of despair, now felt a surge of strength. Their eyes shone with disbelief and relief. Some even let discreet tears fall behind their masks. And me, as a doctor, I was supposed to keep my professional composure. But I confess, in that moment, my own heart raced. It felt like I was witnessing something beyond medicine, beyond physiology, something that touched the soul. As we stabilized Carlos, adjusting medications and securing ventilation support, I couldn't help but reflect silently. How many times in life do we keep pushing even when everything tells us to stop? And how many times does the improbable happen precisely because we choose to take one step beyond what logic allows? That night, I witnessed the improbable turn into reality. The body that no longer responded, the heart that had stopped, started beating again, against all statistics, against every protocol, and I knew this wasn't just science, it was something greater. The sound of the heart monitor filled the room once more with its steady rhythm, that simple beeping sound which so often blends into the hospital's background noise now rang out as a true anthem of victory. Every heartbeat on the screen was like a silent cry of defiance. "I'm still here." For a few moments, I stood motionless, just watching. I had witnessed hundreds of cardiac arrests in my career, but this one was different. The long silence, the severity of the case, the flat line that had insisted on telling us it was over. Everything pointed toward tragedy. And yet, against all odds, Carlos's heart had chosen to return. As we adjusted medications and stabilized his vitals, a storm of thoughts passed through my mind. Medicine is, above all, science. We work with numbers, statistics, probabilities, but there are moments when numbers cannot explain the reality in front of us. And in those moments, something awakens deep inside, the sense that a greater force is at work. I looked around at my team. They were exhausted, but their eyes carried a different kind of light. It was the look of people who knew they had just taken part in something extraordinary. Nurses, technicians, doctors, all aware of how rare it is to see such an unexpected return. In that moment, the resuscitation room felt less like a cold hospital space and more like a sacred place where the impossible had revealed itself. And I turned to you, the viewer, as I did to them. How many times in your life have you felt that everything was lost, that there was no way out, and suddenly something changed? Maybe not in a hospital, maybe not in front of a monitor, but in some moment of your life. Situations where logic said there's no chance, but destiny chose to write another story. It was impossible not to be moved. The burden of being a doctor is not only about saving lives, but also about carrying memories. And I knew I would never forget the sound of that beeping returning, not just because it meant Carlos was alive, but because it reminded me that we, as human beings, always stand on the edge of mystery. I wish I could tell knew that at that moment everything was solved. But the truth is, when a patient comes back after cardiac arrest, it's only the beginning of a long battle. Every minute afterward is critical. How will the brain respond? Will there be lasting damage? Can the body endure the critical hours still to come? The miracle didn't close the story. On the contrary, it opened a new chapter, one filled with challenges and uncertainty. And that's exactly what I want to keep sharing with you. Because even though we had just witnessed the inexplicable, Carlos's journey was only beginning. From that point on, every glance, every gesture, every decision would matter. And believe me, the emotions still to come would be just as intense as the moment his heart returned. Carlos lay on the stretcher, connected to tubes, monitors, and medications. His heart was beating again, though fragile, as if it were fighting an inner storm. His eyes were closed, his skin cold, but with each beep of the monitor, all of us felt a spark of hope growing in the room. The team worked with precision, almost in silence, but it wasn't a silence of defeat, it was one of reverence. There was something different in the air, a kind of respect before the unexplainable. Every professional in that room had fought countless battles against death, but rarely had we felt so intensely that we were witnessing something beyond medical routine. As we stabilized his condition, I prepared for the next step. Speaking to the family, that is perhaps the hardest task for any doctor. Delivering bad news is never simple, but even in positive cases like this one, the emotional weight is immense. I knew Carlos's wife was outside, probably with her heart in her throat, waiting desperately for any news. I took a deep breath, removed my gloves and mask, and stepped into the hallway. There she was, hands clasped in prayer, her eyes filled with tears. As soon as she saw me, she jumped up, searching desperately for an answer in my face. "Doctor, is he alive?" she asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated for a second, not because I doubted, but because I knew she would never forget my next words. I looked straight into her eyes and said, "Yes." His heart started beating again. Tears immediately streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of disbelief, of love. She put her hands to her face as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard, and then repeated over and over, "Thank you, God, thank you, God." That moment marked me deeply. I, a doctor so used to delivering cold, technical diagnoses, realized that for this woman, none of the medical terms, exam numbers, or future risks mattered. All that mattered was the news. Her husband was still alive, still breathing. When I returned to the room, the team met me with knowing looks. We all understood that the worst had passed, but that we were only at the beginning of a new battle. The days ahead would be crucial. Carlos's body would have to show whether it could withstand the damage caused by the lack of circulation. There was risk of multiple organ failure, brain swelling, cardiac complications. Even so, the atmosphere had completely changed. Moments earlier, we were facing a flat line, the continuous sound of the end. Now, there was a beating heart, a wife crying with joy, and a team renewed. Inside me, a certainty grew. What had happened wasn't just a successful procedure. It was something greater, something that went beyond science. It felt like life itself had answered, like the unseen had revealed its presence. As Carlos was transferred to the ICU, I looked at him one more time. His face was calm, the machines sustaining every vital function, but still, a spark of life pulsed there. I thought to myself, how many more days will he have? Hours, months, years. No one can predict. But for now, he won. And that victory wasn't his alone. It belonged to his wife, to the team, to everyone who had believed it was worth fighting, even when everything seemed lost. After stabilization and transfer, the hospital's atmosphere shifted almost palpably. It's incredible how, in just a few minutes, the same place can swing from absolute despair to renewed hope. Minutes earlier, the emergency room felt suffocating, heavy with tension. Now it felt lighter, as if everyone could breathe again. I watched my team, doctors, nurses, technicians, all of them accustomed to the harsh reality of saving lives and often losing them. But this time, their eyes carried something different. Some smiled faintly behind their masks, others exchanged silent nods. Each of them knew they had been part of something rare, almost otherworldly. One nurse, with tears held back, came up to me and whispered, "Doctor, I swear I thought he wouldn't come back, but when I saw the monitor, it felt like a miracle." I just nodded. I felt the same. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Carlos's wife remained in prayer. She sat on a bench, her shoulders still trembling, but now with tears of gratitude. Each drop carried away the fear of minutes earlier and brought with it the immense relief of having life return to her husband. When I approached her again, she quickly stood, wiping her face. She gripped my hands tightly, as if I were the link between her and Carlos's fragile heartbeat. "Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. I know you did everything, but I also know I felt that God was in that room." I stayed silent for a few seconds. As a doctor, my role is to explain, to guide, to bring clarity. But faced with her conviction, I had nothing to add. And deep inside, I too had felt something different that night. Later, alone in my office, I reflected on everything that had happened. Doctors learned to work with statistics, survival rates, risks of after effects, percentages of recovery. But numbers don't explain everything. Carlos's return was statistically improbable, almost impossible. And yet it happened. And this is where I find myself in a personal dilemma. As a professional, I must trust science, because it guides my decisions and saves thousands of lives every day. But as a human being, I cannot ignore the moments when science falls silent. This episode reminded me that there is an invisible, mysterious dimension that shows itself in life's most critical instance. The team was also moved. In the following days, many spoke of it in the hallways. Some said they would never forget the beeping sound returning. Others called it a second chance, luck, divine strength. Each had their own interpretation, but all agreed on one thing: we had witnessed something extraordinary. As for me, I was divided between two emotions. First, the satisfaction of fulfilling my duty, not giving up, pushing to the limit. Second, a deeper feeling, the sense of standing before a mystery greater than myself, as if that hospital had for one night become the stage for something that transcends medicine. And that blend of reason and emotion, science and faith, has stayed with me to this day. In medicine, we're taught to work within very clear boundaries. There is a line between life and death, between what's possible and what isn't. When a heart stops, we have protocols, drugs, procedures. Every step is studied, trained and repeated. Yet still, there are moments when reality slips through science's grasp. Carlos's case was exactly that, a brutal reminder that we are not always in control. The flat line on the monitor told us it's over. Logic affirmed there is no return. And yet, life chose another path. When I think back to that moment, I can't help but believe that medicine and faith are not enemies. On the contrary, they walk side by side. Medicine offers the means, the technique, the support, but there is an invisible space, a place where science goes quiet and something greater manifests. Call it what you will: faith, destiny, miracle. The name doesn't matter compared to what is lived. Many colleagues prefer not to use the word miracle. They fear it diminishes technical effort or opens the door to unscientific interpretations. I understand that. But for me, what happened that night was exactly that. A miracle. Because there was no plausible explanation for that heart to come back the way it did after so many minutes of silence. And here is the point I want to share with you. Life is full of moments when we face our own flat line. Maybe not in a hospital, but in daily life. When we lose someone, when a dream feels impossible, when a door slams shut. In those times, everything points to the end. But sometimes, the unexpected happens. Carlos taught me more than any medical textbook could. He showed me that life insists, even when we think it has given up, that there is something beyond statistics, something no machine can measure and no graph can explain. I don't know how long he will live. I don't know if he will face after effects or new challenges, but I do know that that night, despite all my experience, I witnessed a breath of mystery, and it changed how I look at every patient. I began to see each heartbeat not as just another number on a monitor, but as a gift. Each breath not as something automatic, but as a blessing. And every life entrusted to us as something sacred, deserving of all the science we can give and all the humanity we can offer. Maybe as you hear this story, you're asking yourself, was it luck? Was it science? Was it God? For me, the answer is, we don't need to choose just one. It may have been all of them at once. What matters is recognizing that even in the cold hallways of a hospital, there is room for the unexplainable. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. Never underestimate life's ability to surprise. That night, when I finally left the emergency department, my steps through the hallway felt heavier, slower. The hospital, lit by artificial lights and filled with the distant hum of monitors, had already returned to its routine, patients arriving, staff hurrying, voices overlapping. But inside me, nothing was routine. I had witnessed something that would stay with me forever, not just as a doctor, but as a human being. The monitor that flatlined, the line that announced the end, and minutes later, the improbable, almost impossible return. You cannot live through something like that and remain unchanged. As I walked, I thought about how many times we give up too soon in life, how often we surrender to life's flat line, convinced there's nothing more to be done. But Carlos's story taught me that sometimes it's precisely when everything seems finished that life finds a way to return. And that's the message I want to leave you with. Never underestimate the power of the unexpected. Never give up before the very last second, because it may be in that exact instant that the miracle happens. Now, I need to ask something important. If this story moved you, if it touched you in any way, help this channel reach more people. YouTube only delivers this content if there's interaction. So please, do it now. Leave a like so this video gains strength. Subscribe to the channel to keep following real powerful stories like this one. And write in the comments, I believe in miracles. Your participation is essential for this message of hope to reach more lives. And don't forget, there's already another video waiting for you with a story that will grip you from beginning to end. I won't reveal the title now, but I can guarantee this. It will stir your emotions just as much as this one. So when you're done here, click on the video already appearing on your screen and keep walking with me through this path of faith, science, and mystery. After all, life is made of stories. Some can be explained, others never will. But all of them have the power to transform those who hear them. I am Dr. Ricardo Martins, and I thank you deeply for being with me. Until the end, I'll see you in the next video.